Welcome to the Wirecard Saga, a podcast with Tom Fox and Mikhail Ryder-Gordon, Managing Director of Institutional Ethics and Integrity at Affiliated Monitors. Over this podcast series, we're going to take a deep dive into the Wirecard Saga to see where it may take us literally across the globe. Mikhail Ryder-Gordon and myself continue our exploration of all things Wirecard with our episode number 20, Part 2, The Blast Zone. We continue to take a look at entities, persons, and even governments who have been negatively impacted by the nuclear fallout from the Wirecard scandal. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. Welcome back to another episode of the Wirecard Saga, where I'm joined by my colleague, Mikhail Ryder-Gordon, Managing Director at Affiliated Monitors. Mikhail, what do we have today?
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back again for another episode of the Wirecard Saga with Mikhail Ryder-Gordon. Mikhail, what do you have for us this week?
Hello, Tom. Well, admittedly, you and I have been getting rather a good laugh out of the total circus the Wirecard Saga has become. Don't misunderstand me, listeners. It isn't that I find money laundering, political corruption, governance failures, inept administration, lax regulatory oversight, treason, Russian meddling in Western countries, or actually any of the other crimes emanating from or related to Wirecard in the least bit amusing. But let's be honest, in the wildest fiction, you couldn't dream this stuff up. Still, you have to admit, in a very sick sort of way, it has its appalling yet humorous moments. How many boys' own fantasies does it take to bring down a government or two? I know the last few episodes have been almost exclusively focused on the hearings in Austria and Germany, but don't worry, folks. Well, I agree. I'm barking mad as well. I'll be cycling back to Singapore, the Philippines, the U.S., and all the other jurisdictions, also teasing out the ugly truth from this saga. The circus tent is a big one, and the clowns, the performing goats, and the dancing bear just keep walking into the ring. Those of us in the audience are allowed an occasional guffaw. Okay, so let's talk about those in the past couple of weeks who have not found the humor in their own respectively tricky situations. I'm going to call this episode No Laughing Matter. First up, none other than Brawny Boy, former CEO Marcus Braun, still languishing in Augsburg-Gobelingen prison as he awaits trial. Now, he has something else to contemplate. It has emerged that Braun may find himself pleading his case, several cases if we're honest, not in Germany, but in Austria. Recall, he's an Austrian citizen and even maintained a residence in Vienna where his family were said to have lived, or maybe still do. However, because up until recently he was understood to be a resident of the Munich area, and Wirecard was based outside of Munich, the prosecution of Braun was assumed to fall to the Munich Public Prosecutor's Office. Until this past week, when it emerged that Braun maintains a residence in the Innsbruck area of Austria. Now, Braun and his attorneys claim the Innsbruck house is just a holiday bolt hole, one he used on weekends, holidays, and during vacation time. Unfortunately, according to the Innsbruck Central Register, and that's a bit like an assessor's and census office all in one, Braun has long maintained his 11.7 million euro villa in Kutzbühel, Innsbruck, with his primary residence. He even went so far as to promise in writing in the purchase agreement of the property back in 2013 that he was not buying it as a vacation home, but rather as his primary residence. Golly, I hope he wasn't intentionally trying to defraud the authorities with that assertion. Now, why does this matter? Well, as one lawyer representing a client who has brought a claim for damages against Braun and Wirecard, and the lawyer was quoted in the local Tiroler Tageszeitung, and astutely observed, if Braun's main residence is in Kitzbühel, then lawsuits against Braun and against auditor EY in Innsbruck would be possible. Plaintiffs' counsel representing claims against Braun think getting venue in Innsbruck would be just fabulous. Why? Faster procedures and higher damages are possible in Innsbruck, particularly over those in German courts. In Germany, the Austrian attorneys claim court procedures could take a decade or more. Now, lest you mistakenly think that this is just wishful thinking, the Innsbruck Regional Court is now clarifying Braun's residential question because Braun, air quotes, inadvertently failed to cancel his primary residence in the lovely ski resort town of Kitzbühel, also known as Gamstadt for those of you ski heads, ski bums. It is so tough being a one-percenter, so much to keep track of. Now, one of the very reasons Munich has ordered Braun's continued pretrial detention, and his next detention hearing isn't set to be heard for another 3 months, is because the Munich prosecutor's office is concerned Braun, will run straight back to Austria the first chance he gets. Why wouldn't he? He's got friends in high places on that side of the Alps. Braun may now be fighting 2 fronts, criminal charges in Germany and multiple civil actions in little old Innsbruck. And for Braun, that wasn't the end of his woes this week. German news outlet Süddeutsche Zeitung broke the story that Braun, using his personal company, and you know this is the one that runs the Braun family office. I discussed it most recently in the last episode, part 1, episode 20, the loan officer who didn't get paid some 800,000 euros for helping Braun refi his notes coming due. Well, this week it emerged that back in December 2017, Jan Marsalik came to Braun cap in hand, seeking a private 50 million euro loan from his buddy. Braun, via his company, and that's the MB Beidelgungs, if you've lost track, gave it to him. Braun and Marsalik signed a contract in mid-December 2017, and Braun handed over a cool $50 million to Marsalik. How did this become known? Braun is alleged to have told the public prosecutor's office during an interrogation a few weeks ago. According to Braun, Marsalik claimed he needed the loan for his safety, but the loan was unsecured. Oh, Marcus, you know the rule. Never lend money to friends and family. Didn't you do your Unco Doriro with Unco Sensei? Cautions against impulsive lending to friends? And listeners, sidebar here. If you haven't seen it, go take a look at Japan's financial service agency's latest animated lessons from Uncle Dororo, who's kind of like a giant poop emoji. Guano has never been so funny or edifying. Okay, but I digress. As may have been anticipated, according to Braun, Marsalik didn't fully repay the loan. The con man got conned. Braun claims Marsalik still owes him 14 million euros. But the story gets a little more convoluted than just a straight-up non-repayment of monies lent between friends. Because Braun himself had taken a personal loan of 150 million from Deutsche Bank. Have we ever had a single episode of this series where this bank failed to make an appearance? That's right. Braun borrowed 150 million from Deutsche Bank, but under the terms of that loan, he was to disclose the proper use of the loan proceeds. Braun then lent 50 million of that 150 he borrowed to Marsalik. Now, Marsalik's agreement with Braun also is said to have had a clause requiring Marsalik to tell Braun what he was doing with his loan monies. Beyond Marsalik's safety? Was it to do with food delivery service? Remember Marsalik's connection to Alexander Vuchok, IMF Capital? You got to go back to episode 11. And the connection to Gumo and the grocery delivery company GetNow? Okay, so Braun told the prosecutor's office that he and Marsalik got into a bit of a tiff in 2019. You know, the way besties can fall out. I'm sure it surprised them both. No doubt they returned to braiding each other's hairs a week later. All right, the tiff was said to have resulted from Marsalik taking his sweet time repaying this loan. Now, KPMG was already doing their behind-the-scenes forensic work in 2019. The FT stories had been published months before. And here it is, December of 2019, and Braun is mad at Marsalek because he wants his loan paid back. Why? Because, well, Marsalek allegedly told Braun that he couldn't pay it back all that swiftly because he'd agreed to put $47 million of the $50 million into an escrow account of a yet-to-be publicly named group on the Isle of Man. If you've forgotten Wirecard's nexus to the Isle of Man, go back to episodes 5, 9, 10, 11, 17, or just recall Henry O'Sullivan. Okay, so Braun's $150 million loan with Deutsche Bank was due on April 1st, 2020. Remember, that's why he hired the personal banker to find some other SAP institution to take the refining of those loans. So he's getting a little antsy in December of 2019. He's only got 4 months to refi these loans, and he needs, well, Marsalek to pay back a third of the greater loan Braun took from Deutsche Bank. In fact, he's scratching around Wirecard Bank for a possible loan to cover this, or so he claims. On April 1st, Marsalek hands over 35 million euros to Braun's personal company. But that 35 mil, it wasn't from the original 50 mil Braun lent Marsalek. This wasn't a repayment of that principal. Nope. Wirecard, the company, lent $100 million to an Asia-based company, and listeners, anyone want to guess at which of O'Sullivan's myriad related entities this went to? Okay. And some of that $100 million lent to this supposed related party company, surely for business growth, of course, found its way to Lithuania. Naturally, where else were you thinking of, listeners? Back in March 2019, remember, Oliver Bellenhaus, then CEO of Card Systems Middle East, had posted a rave review of Lithuania as a, quote, gate for the international finance services companies of Europe, raving about a law firm there, the Covis Proventus Law, who he said could handle all aspects of financial and corporate matters and who support Wirecard regularly. Anywho, so the $100 million goes from this Asia-based company to Lithuania, and then the money flowed back to the Isle of Man, of course, to that same account of Marsalek's. Marsalek then used the funds to pay a portion of his debt to Braun, 35 mil or 50 mil. So with Braun's help, Wirecard, the company, appears to have paid for a goodly portion of personal loans taken out by both Braun and Marsalek. That's right, guys. You work for the company, make it work for you. Braun apparently is playing the victim card for the interrogating prosecutors. He has actually claimed, I've lost millions to Marsalek too. I'm a casualty of Marsalek's deception, just like the rest of you. And speaking of negative events from associating with Braun, remember Deutsche Bank supervisory board member Alexander Schütz? He who had counseled Braun in emails to go after the Financial Times and called Braun a naughty boy. But in jest, of course. This as they planned to row their yachts alongside one another when in the Med so as to share drinking pools and toast their shared disdain for investigative reports and tiresome truths. Recall Schütz, a business school dropout, also founded Vienna-based asset management company C Quadrat. And if you missed the last couple of episodes about the nexus between Wirecard and the Austrian political scandals, Ibiza in particular, then you've missed that Schütz sits in that pile of guano as well. In the Ibiza committee, Schütz is to answer questions about his OVP donations and chit-chats with former FPO man Johann Goodness. Remember Goodness? Go back to episodes 19 and 20. Schütz was giving Goodness tips back in 2018, like the suggestion that the Freedom Party, that's the Austrian Freedom Party, should demand a second board position in the state holding company, OB. All right. Is this why Schütz is no longer laughing? Not really. Well, maybe a little bit. But thanks to his unfortunate critique of the FT and his having bragged to Braun that, by the way, bought 3 times Wirecard shares last week, make that newspaper ready, and his pending testimony to an Austrian parliamentary investigation into that massive Ibiza scandal that includes the Wirecard folks. Well, after all that, Deutsche Bank was left with little choice but to encourage Schutz to say Auf Wiedersehen. So long, farewell, Auf Wiedersehen. All right, so Schutz is retiring from Deutsche Bank's supervisory board forthwith. He issued a formal apology to the Financial Times and its reporters, but that's not all. A couple of months ago, it was quietly announced that Schutz had also sold his Deutsche Bank shares. The finance manager was one of the 15 largest shareholders. Since 2019, he'd held approximately 17.4 million shares in Germany's largest bank via his family office in Vienna. These shares in Deutsche Bank were residual stocks of the Chinese conglomerate HNA, once the largest shareholder of German credit institution. And Schutz, like the Chinese, held his shares through a complex construction of derivatives. C. Quadrate managed the Chinese stake in Deutsche Bank, which is how Schutz joined the supervisory board in 2017. You know about the scandal with HNA, right, folks? All right, well, we're not covering it in this series. Well, at least Schutz won't be distracted with all things Deutsche Bank and can now turn his full attention to prepping his answers before the Ibiza Investigation Committee. And several other individuals appear to have lost their sense of humor over the past couple of weeks, also while testifying to the German Bundestag's ISB. Called up to answer questions over the past 10 days, there's been quite a roster of who's who in the Wirecard zoo. Stefan von Urfa, former head of accounting at Wirecard AG. Thomas Eichelmann, former chairman of the supervisory board of Wirecard AG. Daniel Steinhoff, former head of compliance at Wirecard AG. Sandra Schuster, former personal assistant to Marcus Braun. Christian Orth, professional practice director at EY. Herbert Barth, former CEO of EY Germany, and Sven Hake, lending, banking, and capital markets PwC, and Heike Pauls, former analyst at Commerce Bank. It's been a very active couple of weeks. If you don't remember Heike, she was the one feeding intel to Wirecard. She had access to from hedge fund Greenvale Capital. And, just so you remember, Commerce Bank, partially state-owned banking institution in Germany. Okay, so Greenvale had issued negative analysis of Wirecard. Heike was having none of it. She was a huge Wirecard champion, so she fed the information to Burkhard Ley and Iris Stockel. Stockel is one of Wirecard's comms directors. In fact, Heike just kept pushing clients to buy Wirecard shares up until implosion date. Anyway, Commerce Bank found out about the info share back in January, gave Heike the boot back in February. She may have lost her sense of humor, too. But let's turn to Stefan von Urfa's testimony, because he really has turned sour. Turn that frown upside down, Stefan. Whilst he swings his feet sitting on the bench awaiting his turn at trial, von Urfa was called back to the IC to testify, seeking desperately to avoid incriminating himself. Von Urfa hasn't been all that helpful. However, he did feel comfortable telling the IC about Wirecard's love of consultants. Couldn't spend enough on them, apparently. Von Urfa suggested that Wirecard AG may have used the awarding of lucrative consulting contracts in order to buy what he called a benevolent attitude from various and sundry individuals and institutions. Now, von Urfa would sign off on some of these contracts. For instance, the contract with Klaus-Dieter Fritzsche, remember him? Former intelligence coordinator in the German Chancellery. He received a contract for consulting services at Wirecard. Go back to episodes 15, 17, 18. Remember, he who also happened to be working for the Austrian BVT. Oh yeah, now it's all coming back to you. In fact, Fritzsche is due to testify to the IC in April, alongside Angela Merkel. That'll be fun. Anyway, von Urfa was shedding light on contracts, if you will, to the IC. And he mentioned Burkhard Lay, the former Wirecard CFO. Now, Lay left Wirecard formally in 2017, then hung around to dispense advice. For his availability under his consulting contract with Wirecard, Lay was paid 900,000 euros a year for offering occasional, on Urfa's words, advice related to company takeovers. His consulting contract with Wirecard, approved by von Urfa, also provided Lay with a company car and an assistant. Very generous. MP Matthias Hauer speculated in the form of a question about whether this remuneration could have possibly served, in a sense, as a form of hush money, to keep the former member of the board happy. After all, Lay may have known many of the dirty details about Wirecard's less salubrious activities. Now, not only did von Urfa lack humor, but seemingly remorse. He told the IC he could not have imagined that such things as Wirecard's myriad frauds could happen. His only expressed regret was that he was very sorry Wirecard's internal controls didn't prevent the fraud. But von Urfa denied that he had ever found anything out of the ordinary when looking at Wirecard's financials. He, formerly head of finance. Well, yes, he admitted there were organizational difficulties in obtaining information and evidence of the businesses with third-party partners in Asia. But, said von Urfa, the balances of third-party partners, trustees, i.e. two independent bodies, well, those are confirmed by other folks responsible for confirmation, EY. They really bear some responsibility for this debacle. Maybe, von Urfa suggested, they shouldn't have been, maybe they were too gullible and should have dug in and demanded information when it wasn't provided. In general, von Urfa answered many of the questions with the basic attitude of, there's been some fraud at Wirecard, but not in any systemic form, only individual cases. He presented the missing funds as some sort of marginal phenomena that, could be clarified separately. Big payments were the main source of revenue and profit, but from von Urfa's perspective, Wirecard had areas of growth, like the growth based purely on the fraud. Asked by MP Kazelta who was to blame for the fraud, von Urfa vaguely referred to the perpetrators. Clueless? Delusional? Or unwilling to accept responsibility? We'll get to apologies in a moment. Let's examine another witness's statement, that of Wirecard Supervisory Board Chairman Thomas Eichelman. Now, the IC seemingly thought Eichelman would provide an agnostic or objective viewpoint on all that has gone on there. He came late to the game, but he opted to toss von Urfa under the bus. When asked about his impression of Wirecard's accounting department and its competence, Eichelman said, quote, "My impression was mildly mediocre." After taking office, and again, fairly late into Wirecard's disintegration, what did Ernest Hemingway say about bankruptcy? It happened gradually and then suddenly. Eichelman had pushed for cleaning up the company and initiated special controls by KPMG, right, including having them exclusively report to the supervisory board. Eichelman told the IC he'd rapidly come to the conclusion that von Urfa, as Wirecard's head of accounting, was sometimes just completely mistaken. Von Urfa's response, referring to Eichelman, was that they probably wouldn't be friends anymore. I'm sure Eichelman is devastated at the thought he won't receive the annual holiday card from von Urfa this year, from prison. Now let's turn to the others who were asked to testify, or some of them. EY. Now recall that they had been summoned by the IC back in early January, but at that time had attempted to weasel out of testifying, claiming client confidentiality. a German court swiftly put paid to that lame excuse. So here was Christian Orth, professional practice director at EY, and Herbert Barth, former CEO of EY Germany. And ready, like Braun and Van Urfer, EY also views itself, wait for this, as a victim of the Wirecard scammers. I'm not making this up. How could I? When asked by the IC why had EY, which had been auditing the balance sheet of Wirecard for 10 years, not noticed any of the alleged gigantic fraud for so long, Bart's response was intentional and systematic fraud. It's not always recognizable for auditors. Why, Herr Bart, are you and your firm even there? What point do you serve exactly? The IC asked, wouldn't EY have had to track down that 1.9 billion euros allegedly parked in trust accounts in Asia long before 2020? Orth said, well, having bank documents submitted by the trustees is, well, an absolutely unusual audit practice. Okay, in whose world? When confirming claimed cash holdings, where do you look? The bank statements obtained from the custodian of records at the bank. Rocket science it ain't. In fact, I know newly minted college grads that know instinctively to ask for support directly from the third party. Eventually, EY got there. According to Orth, after a well-known bank in Singapore no longer wanted to keep Wirecard's escrow account in 2019, and Wirecard confided it had a new trustee in the Philippines since September, well, quote, that's when the fire alarm went on. That was the turning point for me, Orth said. But EY didn't learn of the shift to the Philippines until it had held joint meetings with colleagues from KPMG, which had carried out a special audit, remember? And that wasn't until January 29th, 2020, that meeting of minds. Orth reported that EY auditors had not considered it necessary for years to confirm banks for the existence of fiduciary accounts in Asia. Instead, they just took the trustee's word for it. Now, the witnesses tried to make clear how suspicions about Wirecard's business practices and structures had been substantiated pretty late in the game. But then, in addition to the legal and professional requirements, they reacted, well, a little awkwardly. In the 2010s, Wirecard had drawn, that beautiful picture of a successful startup, reputable DAX company. And this, according to Bart and Orth, well, between that and the analysis of the banks and credit rating agencies and, well, heck, even the conduct of the German federal authorities, all of that, quote, says, or we continue to see Wirecard positively. The financial statements, they were all certified in 2018 and 2019. And, well, according to Orth, despite throwing more staff and hours, read more billing, to review Wirecard's 2018 audit, there was just no basis not to clear Wirecard. They hadn't found anything. Although, says Orth, they did put some language in the audit statement that referred to the Singapore case, the damning Raj and Tan report, and that in Orth's mind, this was a way for EY to signal to the public its concerns about Wirecard. I'm kind of surprised they didn't just put it in special code, or maybe they did. Maybe they used steganography and hid it only so those in the know would understand where to locate it. According to Orth, this rosy picture was only tarnished by the critical and investigative reporting. He said, for example, by the Financial Times. Oh, and some incriminating material from whistleblowers. Oh, yeah, those darn whistleblowers. Remember, there's been quite a volume of them. Back to episode 14, folks. Remember the whistleblowers that date back to 2016? Remember the Raja and Tan report? was issued in January 2019. But Wirecard's outlook was so positive. Two other small things. He said, made him a little stupid. This is Ort's words, not mine. In one of the annual reports of the Asian banks holding these accounts, the foreign currency risk of the accounts denominated in euros were not listed. This and the repeated absence of transaction testing, that raised some doubts in his mind as to the existence of euro accounts. But then he said, quote, "This was a group of criminals that managed to deceive everyone, including us at EY. And this whole Wirecard incident, it hasn't just damaged EY, it's damaged the profession as a whole." Has it? I don't think less of PwC or Deloitte for the Wirecard fraud. Interesting perspective, Herr Ort. When asked whether EY had made mistakes, Ort replied that EY staff had checked in good conscience and responded to all the applicable standards. He, too, had nothing to reproach himself for. Stunned? So were IC members. They reacted in disbelief. The fact that until that time, invalid bank statements had been held in their hands was finally revealed during a meeting with bank executives on 16th of June 2020. Oh, yeah. They didn't even get hold of those until literally days before the company completely melted down. Quote, "We requested an account inspection and then received confirmation that these accounts didn't exist." Eichelman then called often President Huffield, and there were discussions, and then they talked to Marsalik, and then they talked to Braun. Ort described how Braun reacted with incredulously in light of this evidence that the accounts didn't exist, allegedly saying to Ort, "Mr. Ort, you don't believe that I would steal €2 billion. You know what it usually means when someone answers a question with a question? Talk about disassembling. Answer the question, Herr Braun. Ort went on to say that EY doesn't want a second Wirecard because they, EY, can't afford it. Oh, sure. That's a sound reason for not wanting a repeat of the largest corporate fraud in modern German history. EY couldn't afford it. But wait for this final comment. Ort topped that tone-deaf statement by saying, "Can we rule out a second corporate fraud on the level of Wirecard? Can we rule that out with absolute certainty? I don't think anyone can." Well, no, not if EY Germany is the auditor. Seriously, any clean company using EY as their auditor anywhere in the world right now. Is it time to think maybe about sourcing a new vendor for audit services? Outgoing EY Germany Chairman Bart told the IC, quote, "We do not yet exactly know what happened. However, he and his EY associates are determined to help solve this largest and unique fraud scandal in the history of the Federal Republic of Germany." Why, however, was it not possible to detect fraud of this unimaginable magnitude earlier, the IC asked? The figures, which were finally refused in their testing, the 2019 audit in 2020, were certainly not in order as early as 2018. Wouldn't the examiners have had to dig much deeper, much earlier, the IC asked? Bart said, "We have considered the deception and investigated it beyond the normal level, but there was no evidence. His officers just did not allow any formal errors to be made to debit, but the audit of Wirecard balance sheets during the investigation period was, quote, carried out to the best of his knowledge and belief." In a case such as Wirecard's, Bart claimed the profession, that is the accounting profession, the auditing profession, would have reached its outer limit. Quote, it's incredibly hard for auditors to tell whether a deal exists or not, and intentional fraud is not always recognizable. He went on to say, accountants are not criminologists. MP Florian Tom Carr said, are you kidding me? Over the years, EY has accepted whatever Wirecard was willing to offer. Whereas we note the KPMG auditors, on the other hand, just insisted on bank confirmations. MP Zimmerman, Jan Zimmerman that is, picked up on this and said, yeah, quote, it's only thanks to KPMG's tenacity that this huge hoax was ever exposed. MP DeMasi weighs in, saying, EY, under Ort, on the other hand, you've entrenched yourself behind technical testing rules and essentially allowed yourself to be deceived by poorly counterfeited documents. DeMasi went on from there. He said he believes that EY signs of gross breaches of duty. Quote, they have billions of dollars in escrow accounts not verified. MP Bayaz weighs in. Basically, all the German political parties are weighing in. Criticizing EY. Quote, if billions in escrow accounts are not proven beyond doubt, this has to be a reason to test. Bart's response to the IC after all of this criticism? Everyone at EY would like us to have discovered the deeds at Wirecard earlier. Well, quite. Bart went on to say, we've done the tests we could do. and after the Financial Times critical coverage, after the receipt of whistleblower packages, he claimed he told his auditors, turn over all the stones. We added staff. We upgraded the company to high risk. Let's get back to his failure to apologize for a moment. Toward the end of the testimony, Bart told the IC that they, EY, are still investigating the Wirecard case internally, that is, within EY, and new documents are still appearing, to which IC Chairman Kay Gottschalk confirmed that, yes, as a matter of fact, the same day Bart gave testimony, the IC received from EY new audit documents from EY's March 2016 Wirecard audit. Now, those documents are classified as secret, but, said Gottschalk, they raise new questions and could probably provide crucial missing answers because they appear to be key to dealing with the case. What he did let slip, for some reason, back in 2016, the EY auditors had doubts as to whether Wirecard's much-hyped business model was at all feasible. They were questioning the company's viability back in early 2016. Whilst EY claimed to be focused on the 2019 fraudulent bookings brought to their attention in late 2019, early 2020, these 2016 documents that have finally appeared, in the abstract, everything that has been worked out in committee in recent months is recognized in those documents. In other words, all that has come out in the IC hearings to date on Wirecard, they were all known to EY in 2016. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. Gottschalk admonished Bart, telling him, in 2016, you turned wrong. This was grossly negligent. Gottschalk said he found it interesting that Bart produced this document to the IC late on Friday afternoon. He told Bart he would expect him to comment to the IC in detail on these documents at a later date. But listeners, here's another teaser of what was included in those documents from 2016 that EY turned over. It's a question from the IC whether the now former head of EY Germany, Hubert Bart, knew about Jan Marsalik's business in Libya and even exchanged views and communications with Marsalik. And listeners, the IC has a special investigator, Wolfgang Wieland, who is tasked with all aspects of the Wirecard matter that touch on intelligence. He's available as a point of contact if you have any information to share. If you don't know how to reach him directly and don't read German, just ping me, and I'll provide you with his email address. So thankfully, perhaps not too late, Germany's federal government on March 9th confirmed that Opus has initiated professional investigations against certain members of EY Germany and against EY itself. Ain't life grand? And whilst we reel from that shocking news, there is more blame to spread about. I think it's fair to say that the German government has already endured months of mounting mortification over its handling of Wirecard. Well, this past week, it got worse. A new humiliation. Yay! Der Spiegel reported that the German federal government had apparently tried to save Wirecard from insolvency literally 3 days before it went belly up. Yeah, the federal government, via the Ministry of Finance, sought to prevent the insolvency in what they thought might be the exploitation of Wirecard by foreign financial firms. What is this obsession with all things non-German? It's unhealthy, people. Anyway, the Ministry of Finance directed Commerzbank, partially state-owned, to draft rescue plans for Wirecard and apparently tried to recruit additional loans for Wirecard from state-owned IPEX Bank. Now, IPEX belongs to KfW, just if you're keeping track of this. Even the use of taxpayer money was discussed, namely a financial injection from state-owned COVID aid virus funds. So for companies suffering from the COVID pandemic, they had this fund, WSF, that was bandied about that they could use these COVID funds to help save Wirecard. As MP Tongkog pointed out when interviewed, this was a little unrealistic assessment of the state Wirecard was in. It was literally on its last breath. But the effort was apparently initiated by State Secretary Kukis, Minister of Finance Olaf Scholz deputy, as he just happened to have deep contacts with Marcus Braun and other Wirecard managers. Emails from Kukis have been turned over to the IC. Now, a chain of emails evidences Kukis speculating that if German airline Lufthansa is eligible for COVID relief funds, why not try to get the same for Wirecard? One of Kukis' staff wrote an email saying, quote, an initial assessment is to be included in, with a briefing memo to Scholz, which would be given to Scholz that evening. This was followed by Kukis authoring a multi-page memo to Scholz where he attempted to downplay what he called missteps by Wirecard, and he never really defined what those missteps were, and argued that Wirecard was vital to the payments processing industry. After all, he said, they process for Aldi. That's a grocery store chain, folks. And went on to say that in his opinion, Kukis's, Wirecard's business, including Wirecard Bank, wasn't on the brink just yet. He claims press reports were still giving glowing reviews of Wirecard 3 days from total insolvency. Yeah, I don't think so. My favorite is one of the ministry staffer writing that, quote, a bank run could put Wirecard in liquidity difficulties. All right, no laughing matter, I know. So for Finance Minister Olaf Scholz, this is just another ignominious moment. Well, really, it's his area of responsibility and went down on his watch. Emails also surfaced from Klaus Michalik, who heads IPEX, wrote, Mr. Kukis wants to discuss with us whether we can not only stand still, but if necessary, increase our commitment to Wirecard. In other words, don't call in loans, give them more. He CC'd KfW leadership, including head of KfW, Gunter Browning. Eventually, IPEX refused to engage because they deemed the risk just a little bit too high. And another low moment for the German government? Are you guys tired of debasing yourselves yet? As MP DeMasi put it, commenting on the upcoming meetings of the committee, the Wirecard scandal is not based on the criminal energy of an individual perpetrator. No, this is rather a large gang of network of politics and possibly security circles. And speaking of criminals, remember Julian Hessenthaler, PI, part-time narcotics trafficker, general fraudster, witness for Germany's prosecution? Recall last episode, he'd been testifying in Germany to the IC. He'd been arrested there for his extortion, drug trafficking, and he was fighting extradition to Austria. Well, poor Julian's not laughing now. Hessenthaler had reportedly tried everything to prevent his extradition to Austria, but his application was rejected by Germany's Federal Constitutional Court. Why? Well, his European arrest warrant includes his attempt to extort certain seemingly corrupt politicians in Austria for that Ibiza video footage. You know, he's the one who did the video coverage. Don't you love it when criminals try to commit crimes against other criminals? So Austria's Ibiza Investigation Committee cannot wait to get him on the stand. Julian has been shipped to Austria. And turning to Austria, Jan Marsalik's chief flight organizer, he formerly of the BVT, he who worked for Wirecard, he who was money man between Straka and the Ukrainians in the Ibiza scandal, Thomas Schallenbacher, pled guilty at the start of his trial last week. But hold horses. His guilty plea wasn't for the factors in the indictment related to Wirecard. Nope. Wirecard wasn't even included in this. Former politician Schallenbacher pled on Friday, the start of his trial, for serious fraud. So, apparently, from 2007 to 2014, Austria's Economic Corruption Prosecutor's Office, Richter, investigated him and found that after he had left the National Council, the former FPO politician went on to commit a spree of frauds, insurance fraud. And he had one in the indictment. Schallenbacher was paid out 422,000 euros for a real loss of 5,800. In another case, he claimed that road tunnels his company had built had been damaged due to the misplacement by a subcontractor and claimed fraud damages in the millions. His fraud also included in the indictment several leasing contracts, LED control panels that were unusable, he claimed, as a result of misstorage. Basically, he bought a pile of scrap, shipped it to a Romanian company, and then sold it on in leaseback contracts to an Austrian regional government for 100,000 euros. From that same regional government, he obtained, quote, overpayment of some 1.8 million net for a major project for a regional agency. He did this for Osfinag. And an invoice of his to Osfinag grew from 2.5 million euros to 6.5. Not content with that fraud, he attempted to defraud a major regional bank, Meinl. So he's looking at about a nice 7-year sentence for his defrauding of the government. Nonetheless, he continues to be investigated in the Wirecard case. You know, favoritism, helping Jan Marsalik flee justice, and some of his other activities at Marsalik and Wirecard's behest. So one has to appreciate that the guy was all in. Huh? He wasn't really a politician so much as a career criminal. Has anyone had a good day recently? Well, remember Prashant Manak and Sanjay Shandy, founders of Econ Ventures in India? Listeners, you know them as the pair that were the minority shareholders of Hermes iTickets Private Limited, alongside Great Indian Retail Private Limited, GUR. If you've forgotten Wirecard Masala, go back to episode 9. God, that feels ages ago. Okay, so I owe you listeners an apology. It was an extraordinary turn of events back in late February when in England, Manak and Shandy filed a new appeal seeking to hear their 2018 claim in commercial court in London against Wirecard AG, the Ramasamy brothers, and IIFL Wealth UK Limited. I had made a note to tell you all, and then got so sidetracked with all the breaking mayhem in Austria, I forgot. So let me back up a moment to catch you up, because This is kind of fun. Now, Manik, Chandi, and Egan Ventures had filed a claim in England alleging deceit with respect to the sale of Hermes I-tickets. But this was a number of years ago. This was in addition to suits they filed in India against related parties to the Hermes deal. Remember, they'd been offered $40 million to sell their shares in Hermes to EMIS. And just remember, this was Marsalik's special Mauritius offshore vehicle set up for his dodgy deal. The really short version of this is they accepted the $40 million offer only to see Amos turn around and resell Hermes for €350 million to Wirecard. Now, at the time of the original complaint, Manik and Chandi alleged self-dealing on the part of a slew of the Wirecard and Amos folks, including Marsalik, whom they had correctly identified as being inextricably linked to one another. However, this being 2018, the English High Court questioned the complainant's venue when they filed the case in England. Remember, the deal went down in India, but also had a nexus in Austria, Germany, the UK, Singapore, and Mauritius. There were other questions about where disputes under the terms of the contract were to be settled and issues of non-disclosure. Bottom line, in late 2019, the English Commercial Court rejected the claim for lack of venue and that against IIFL Wealth UK, the claimants didn't really have a realistic claim. Now, that was on the particular theory that Manik, Chandi, and Egan Ventures had not really demonstrated that the fourth defendant, Amit Shah, was acting on behalf of IIFL when he made these various representations to them. Okay, so the court had rejected the idea that substantial fraud had occurred within the jurisdiction of English courts. The judge in the original case had largely dismissed the misrepresentations made to Manik and Chandi at the time of Wirecard and Emmett were negotiating this deal. Wirecard had, unsurprisingly, downplayed the truth of what had occurred and that key negotiations had been conducted on the deal in London in their motion to the court. So basically, Wirecard lied to the court. Now, there was far more complexity to the legal argument, which I won't go into here. But bottom line, Manik, Chandi, and Egan Ventures were essentially told, no, you can't go after Wirecard, the Ramaswamy, Shah, IIFL, or anyone in English courts. Go back to your case in India. Because, after all, this English case had been filed in 2018, long before the greater world knew of Wirecard's myriad of frauds, of which Hermes' deal was only one. Fast forward to February 2021. An unusual application appealing the 2019 decision lands before England's Court of Appeal. Because, well, it was worth a shot in light of what is now known. And on March 1st of this year, the High Court ruled in favor of Manik, Chandi, and Egan Ventures. Their case against Wirecard, Shah, the Ramaswamies, IIFL, they'll be heard on English soil. So we have, and I should add, we also have news now that should bring another bright spot to Manik, Chandi, and Egan Ventures, because just the other week, Germany's Financial Intelligence Unit, the Central Office for Financial Transaction Investigations, acknowledged to the IC that it had analyzed transactions by MS for 6 suspected money laundering transactions and submitted a report to federal law enforcement. Good things come to those who wait. Now let's briefly talk about apologies. You may have observed in this episode, Ron, Schutz, Von Erpa, and the 2 EY guys all have fallen short of apologizing for their part in the Wirecard debacle. I know. If they say sorry now, in court, this may be assumed to be a tacit admission of guilt. But at least under English law, the Compensation Act of 2006, I just want to look it up, states that an apology, an offer of treatment or other redress shall not of itself amount to an admission of negligence or breach of statutory duty. Let's talk about ethics. If you've made a mistake, done something wrong, An apology is one of the only ways to which to morally repair the damage. I recognize it won't always fix the damage, but directing some remorse toward all that had been damaged by the Wirecard scandal might be a start. I'm not talking about EY's, golly, we're sorry we missed this for a decade. I'm referring to a more complete apology, one that includes an explanation of what happened. It doesn't feel sincere when we have to wrench it out of you. And more importantly, acceptance of responsibility. EY, Herr von Erfa, Herr Braun, no one wants to hear your excuses. No one wants to hear you try to paint yourself as a victim, too. You had responsibilities, even fiduciary duties, and you failed them. By the way, depending on the country, you may also have statutory duties to candor. There's a concept. So this is the part where if you find your moral compass and point it in the right direction, you apologize, sincerely. You own up to it and take responsibility. So many people have lost money and jobs. Even more have lost trust in government thanks to you. You've shaken confidence in a lot of systems. In fact, at this juncture, we don't yet know the long-term political repercussions you have helped to bring about for German and Austrian politics, which may resonate across the EU and even wider world, potentially for years to come. You oversaw an organization money laundering for some of the most depraved individuals and organizations involved in heinous crimes. Yeah, that was on your watch. You oversaw the company involved in corruption and fraud across government, across the world. The impact of this is far, wide, and deep. With these moral transgressions, you rather forfeited a claim to equal status in society. That's the part where you recognize that you've done wrong by so many people. The ethical task now, Ort, Bart, von Erfa, Braun, I'm talking to you, is to start toward moral repair. That is, accept responsibility that you did wrong and issue full apologies. The first step toward accepting moral responsibility, try a little humility. That's the part where you make an effort to understand and recognize the damage your actions have caused to others. You had moral agency and, well, quite frankly, you abdicated your duties. Let's sure you identify the specific harms you caused and then move on maybe to speaking out loud the moral principles that underpin those harms, each one. Honestly, right now, it doesn't actually feel like you have a clue what those principles might be. Do you have any real remorse beyond being sorry you got caught out? We'd love to hear it. And that is all the time we have today. Next week, all new episode of Why Spies and Corporate Crimes, the Wirecard Saga. I'm Mikhail Ryder-Gordon. My thanks, always and again, to compliance evangelist Tom Fox and the award-winning Compliance Podcast Network. And thanks to you, listeners. You're amazing. I'll see you next week.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode of the Wirecard Saga. The Wirecard Saga is a special production of the Compliance Podcast Network and a proud member of C-Suite Radio. Thanks so much for listening, and we look forward to visiting with you again in the new year.